Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Round. I'm Cycling UK's volunteer team. I'm here to introduce our next session this afternoon, which is called An Introduction to Unconscious Bias, Diversity and Inclusivity. So what does that really mean? Essentially, it's just about how to make everyone who turns up for your rides feel welcomed and accepted by the group and part of this whole cycling experience. It's quite an intimidating thing for people to turn up for a ride. So there's a lot of things that we can do where we look past maybe obvious differences, etc., or subconscious bias that we have, and make people feel much more welcome, more likely to come out cycling. So to introduce this, to present this topic, I'm very pleased to welcome Rosie Clarke. Rosie is the head of Inclusion and Diversity Services North at an organisation called Inclusive Employers. Rosie is an absolute expert in this field. She's a dyslexic person herself, but she has a particular interest in cognitive difference, including neurodiversity, disability and mental illness. And she's also studying for a master's degree in organisational and business psychology. So hopefully this session is going to be really fascinating. If you've got any questions for Rosie, just use the chat function. It's a white arrow on the top right hand side of your screen. So I'm now going to hand over to Rosie.
Thanks, Julie, and good afternoon, everyone. Really pleased to be here presenting this session on diversity, inclusivity and unconscious bias. So what are we going to cover today then? Well, we're going to look at what diversity and inclusion is, why it's important for your organisation, a little bit of the science behind something called unconscious bias, and it's okay if you haven't heard of that before, because we'll learn about it a little bit today. And the relationship between bias and the organisation and individuals. And then we're going to look at also how can you manage the things you do to make sure that everyone feels included. So that's our kind of plan for today's session. As Julie said, feel free to put questions in the questions section or to comment in the chat or get involved in the chat if you want to. That's absolutely fine. So let's start with why we want to focus on diversity and inclusion then. Well, there is lots and lots of research that shows us that actually organisations, we mostly refer to as businesses, but obviously any type of organisation, there's lots and lots of research that shows that organisations actually function better when there are diverse groups of people. So we've got lots of different people, whether that's different genders, different races, different religions, different backgrounds in regards to things like education and where we grew up. All of these things make us better at decision making. They make us better at change and managing organisational change as well. So on one side we've got that, but on the other side we've obviously got, for a lot of people, this is morally the right thing to do. We want everyone to feel included, we want everyone to come and join the organisation, get involved and to feel like they can be themselves and they can enjoy themselves at the same time. So for some people they kind of they focus on what the research tells us, or for other people they focus on what the moral side tells us, and I would say it's kind of a balancing act between the two things. So I want to just kind of show you some of the stats from some of the research into diversity and inclusion in organisations and the opportunity it presents us. So I've got lots of missing stats here, and unfortunately you won't be able to sort of speak to me to guess them, but I won't be able to keep score or who's winning on this quiz, but I'll let you keep score for yourself. So we're going to start with what percentage of over 4,000 people surveyed reported feeling stressed over the past year. So this was in 2018 actually. So what percentage of those people reported feeling stressed? Have a think, maybe write it down if you're going to keep score on yourself. What percentage do you think it'll be? And the answer is 74%. So a huge amount of people reported in that year that they had reported feeling stressed. And obviously with the coronavirus crisis that is hitting our globe at the moment, I'd imagine that this, if anything, may have gone up in 2020. It definitely won't have gone down because of what's going on. So it's a huge amount of people whose mental health is not maybe as good as they want it to be. Organisations that are more gender diverse are what percentage more likely to outperform others? So this is performance in regards to things like financial performance, things like that. How much do you think they outperform if they have gender diversity? Give that a guess. What do you think? 21%. So we know that gender diversity, having a mixture of people of different genders, is better for organisations. It means that we make better decisions, and it means that we service our service users, our customers, our volunteers better if we do that. Next one, then, another mental health one. As I said, mental health is an area I'm very interested in. Work-related mental ill health costs the UK economy up to what figures? This is a pounds figure, a financial figure, every year through lost working days, staff turnover, and lower productivity. So how much do you think it costs the economy because of, and we've seen 74% of people experiencing stress, so how much might that be costing? Well, it is 26 billion every year. So, I mean, I find it difficult to even get my head around numbers that are quite that big. I don't think I'll ever see 26 billion, and not of the career in diversity and inclusion anyway. But that is a lot of money that's lost from our economy. So I'm thinking about cycling and the impact that has on mental health, positive impact. Actually, your organisation could play a really positive role in keeping people well, particularly if they feel included in a group, so they're not isolated at home, or they're not feeling that they have to go out for a cycle alone, that they can come, get involved. The exercise will help their mental health, but also the coming together as a group will help their mental health as well. Next one, organisations that are more ethnically diverse are what percentage more likely to outperform other similar organisations? So again, we've had the gender diversity one. What about the ethnicity one? Do we think it's more than 21%, less than 21%? The answer is 33%. So we know that actually a lot of organisations in the UK, the large majority, do not have equal representation in regards to our population, the amount of people in our population that are from ethnic minority groups in the organisations. Those that do are much more likely to outperform their competitors, which is fantastic. Next one, what percentage of disabled people are in employment compared to 84% of the non-disabled population? So if you're not disabled, you have an 84% employment rate as a population, but what about disabled people? What do we think? Do we think it's similar, higher, lower? I think it's actually only 26.6%. So it's really very low in the UK, very, very low, and lower than some of our European counterparts as well. We have a real problem with under-employment of disabled people, and something that we really need to kind of work on. And the last one, what percentage of people surveyed in 2015 reported bullying and harassment at work? And the answer to that one is 29%. So again, you know, quite a reasonably high figure in 2015 for people reporting that. So the reason why I sort of do these stats, I mean, maybe you got 6 out of 6 on your quiz there. I'll just have to trust you, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe you didn't get any, at least I know you're going away learning something today, so that's brilliant. But it just paints a picture really of how important diversity is when we're talking about any organisation. We know that organisations that are diverse are better off, but we also know there are real inequalities in our society. We do have issues with bullying in organisations, and that stretches to volunteers as well as employees. And we also know that there's a lot of people out of work because either workplaces won't accept them, won't include them, haven't got the right things in place, or their mental health is meaning that they're unable to work for that particular point in time. So really, really interesting kind of picture of mental health in organisations. So what we've sort of mentioned some of these words: equality, diversity, and inclusion, but what do they actually mean? Well, sometimes they can be a bit confused. Sometimes we use them all together, but actually they are slightly different. So equality is the state of being equal. So it could be in regards to status, opportunities, rights. We often use it when we talk about the law, which we'll briefly talk about today. And it's something that is very, very helpful, but it's kind of the bedrock. So we don't have a choice about things like the Equality Act, which we will talk about. That's our legal system. We have to comply with it, or we break the law, like we would if we, shoplifted something. We'd be breaking a law. So it's the basic level, which is what we expect from people. Of course, people do break it, like they break all laws, but it's those expectations. Equality is not necessarily what we're aiming for, because it's quite basic. And that's where our other two terms come in. So diversity is about the mix of different people, and the mix of different people is really important because it's really easy to have a really inclusive group of people when all those people are the same. So it's really easy for me as a white woman to meet up with a group of other white women and to feel safe and to feel included and to feel part of the group, because that naturally happens with people who have the same basic characteristics that you do. Diversity is about the fact that we all have different characteristics, and we want to encourage and bring those different characteristics together to create an inclusive organisation. So inclusion is about accepting, but also really valuing the differences that we bring. And it's about actually not just what we do, but how we do it. How do we go about our behaviour, our language? How do we make that effort to make people feel included as much as they possibly can? So we've got the basic state of the law with equality, we've got diversity, which is a mix of people, and then we've got inclusion, which is how we go about making sure that diverse mix feels safe and secure. And for those of you who maybe work in businesses and things like that, aside from being involved in cycling, you may have heard of something called psychological safety, which is part of this idea of inclusion, that we're not just safe so we don't get hit by a car or something like that, but we're safe in our mind, who we are. So you might want to look that up if you're interested afterwards. What do we think is protected by the law then? So under the law, we have something called 9 protected characteristics. And I've given you a little image here that may give some of them away. I'd love to kind of hear some of your guesses in the chat. So if you want to use the chat just give me some guesses of what you think some of the characteristics might be that are protected under the law, that would be fantastic. So I'll type hello in the chat so you all know where it is. and you should see it come up. It's usually, I think, on the side of your screen. Give me some guesses in the chat. What do you think they might be? Any guesses at all? Fantastic. Great, we've got people saying religion, ethnicity, disability, age, faith, gender, sexuality. Oh, brilliant. Loads of fantastic guesses there. Absolutely, I think everyone's getting at least one right in the chat there. Gender identities as well. That's a really good one. Not many people get that. Fantastic. Brilliant. So you've got lots and lots of those. A couple that we're missing maybe, and some of the ones that we maybe don't think of as much. So yeah, we all got things like age, disability, race, sex, which sometimes we refer to as gender. We also have things like pregnancy and maternity, and we also have marriage and civil partnership that's protected under there. So these are our 9 protected characteristics, and they're really, really important because we'll break the law if we are discriminating, treating people differently because of this. So let's see what we can and can't do then. Well, the Equality Act says we can't discriminate based on these protected characteristics. And discrimination is when we treat someone less favourably than another person because of that characteristic, or the characteristic they are thought to have. So we have some different types of direct discrimination, and you don't always have to know that the person has that. So you might perceive the person to be someone that is gay, for example, but you don't know that they are, and you treat them differently because of that perception, and that would be breaking the law. So it can be anything from in a workplace scenario, it could be not giving someone a job or a promotion, or it could be leaving someone out. So in the situation you're in, it could be not inviting them along when you're meeting up, or excluding them in some way to mean that they can't access the service that is being provided. We also have something called indirect discrimination, and that's when we have a policy or a rule in the way that we do things that means that a particular group of people are disadvantaged. So let's take an example. Let's say that you had a rule that, I'm sure you don't have this rule, that ride cycles you could only were allowed to take place on a Sunday. And that was the only time that you as an organisation would ever allow those groups to meet up. And because of that, people who were Christian and practiced that Christianity would obviously want to go to church on a Sunday, and they weren't able to take part in the cycling and also take part in their religion. So that could be, it's not always because it's quite complicated, but something like that could be indirect discrimination, because you didn't set about to purposefully disadvantage Christians. However, the rule itself has had the effect of disadvantaging them. So this is indirect discrimination. And then we have 2 other things as well. This is more about behaviour, so harassment, and that's when there is unwanted conduct, so some sort of behaviour which is about or relevant to one of those protected characteristics, and it either has the purpose or it has the effect of violating an individual's dignity, or creating a hostile, intimidating, degrading, humiliating or offensive environment for that individual. So that's a direct quote from the law there. And the harassment definition is quite broad, and you can see, you know, because it's purpose or effect, so you can mean to make the environment hostile, say for a person of a different race, or you can have made it hostile, not on purpose, but it can be having that effect by maybe the jokes that you're making, or the way that you're behaving towards those people. So it's quite a wide definition. And then victimization, you're unlikely to come across it in the same way, but it's when we treat someone differently who made a complaint. So if someone makes a complaint under the Equality Act and says, the people in my group are discriminating against me because of my sex, for example, and that all gets resolved and it's all fine, and we go back to what we're doing, but then we'll treat that person differently. Maybe we don't talk to them as much, or we don't invite them along to things, then that would be victimization. So it only happens after the complaint. So we're not, you don't need to be a legal expert at all to understand any of this stuff, but it's always good to have a good broad overview of what is acceptable and unacceptable kind of behaviour. But of course we want to go further than that. As we said, this is only the bedrock, the foundations, the stuff that is, we cannot do, but we want to make people feel included, which is a little further. And to do that, I want to talk about something called unconscious bias. So unconscious bias, I wonder, what does it mean to you? Have you ever heard of it? Let's pop some ideas in the chat again and see, what does it mean to you when we say unconscious bias? And you can just take a guess. If you don't know, that's absolutely fine. Any guesses at all? Pop those in the chat. Great. Judgments you make on people or situations. Fantastic. Based on your previous experiences. Very good. Anyone else want to add anything? Habitual discriminatory behaviours that you're unaware of. Lovely. Yeah. So something you kind of do by habit. You're just not aware that you're doing it all the time. Having an opinion about something because of your upbringing. Brilliant. Favouring someone, yeah, maybe because of their accent, yeah, definitely. Leaning towards your own group of values, yeah, brilliant. Acting in a way that discriminates but without realising it. Cognitive biases based on our upbringing and education. Fantastic. Yeah, you're all absolutely on the right lines there. It's definitely what we mean by unconscious bias. So before I give you a sort of formal definition of unconscious bias, I want to do a little reflective exercise. So get comfortable and we'll think about some of these fictional characters. So I want you, when I put the name up of this fictional character, I want you to paint a picture of them in your head. There's no right or wrong answer, they're fictional. So paint a picture of Giles Lawson Jones. I'll just go quiet for a second as you have time to think about Giles Lawson Jones. Great. So how about the next one, Chardonnay Webster? Think about Chardonnay. You might want to think about this person's sex, gender. Maybe you see them as a particular race. Maybe you see the hobbies that they have, the clothes that they wear. As I said, there's no right or wrong. And the last one, Aggie Johnson. I want you to do the same thing, paint Aggie Johnson in your mind. Okay. And I saw some of you putting some of the things you were thinking in the chat as well, which is great. So why do I do this? Why do I get you to think about these people when we're talking about unconscious bias? And that's just to sort of say how powerful our brains are. So what you will have done when you have been thinking about these people is that your mind will, within a split second, before you even kind of realised it was working, will have brought together lots and lots of past experiences, things you've read in the newspapers, maybe TV shows you've watched, and it'll brought together all the information that you have that could be associated with this person or parts of the name of this person, and it'll have brought it together into something that makes sense. So it might be that you saw, someone said in the chat that they saw someone upper class for Giles Lawson Jones. It's probable that you will have imagined a male person, and for Chardonnay and Aggie, you probably imagined a female person. Maybe for Aggie, I think someone said in the chat, an older person in that imagination. So you'll have brought together all this information, all their possible protected characteristics, also so much more. So what they were wearing, their social class, their possibly the job that they had, or the hobbies that they're involved in. You may have even pictured them in an environment, so in a home or in the countryside, or one of those things. So our brain is incredibly powerful, and it can bring together so much information in a very, very plausible explanation for everything. And we know these people aren't real. So whatever your brain imagined was wrong. It was wrong for all of us because these people are made up, so there isn't a right answer to any of them. But everything you will imagine will have been plausible, and that's why unconscious bias is actually possibly quite a dangerous thing, because it's unconscious, it's in our brain, it's in this powerful machine that gives us answers to things that often lead us to conclusions about people, situations that aren't necessarily always true. So unconscious bias is a bias we're unaware of. It happens outside of our conscious control, and it happens automatically and is triggered by our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations, and it's always influenced by our own background, cultural environment, and personal experiences. So the unconscious bias I have will be different to the unconscious bias each and every one of you have. We will have some similarities because we will have some similarities in our backgrounds, for example. So it might be there's other people on this call who are a similar age to me, or people who, I was born and brought up in the UK, so if you were as well, then we will have experienced some of the same kind of influences being brought up in the British environment than if you have come to the UK more recently and you're brought up in another part of the world, then you will have a different set of biases. That doesn't mean that any of us has more or less than anyone else. Fortunately, we all have them, but we all have slightly different ones. So this is unconscious bias, and it can lead us to do certain things. So how is this bias formed then? Well, we said it's formed by our past experiences, but there's one really good explanation for it, which is from a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by someone called Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is a behavioural economist. And what he does, and if you want to read more, I'd really recommend his book. Actually, it's very readable. Thinking Fast and Slow, he, through his brain research, has given us this, I guess, metaphor for the way that our brain works. He says it's got two systems. It's got system one, which is fast and automatic. It's like an autopilot. It's working all the time. Probably 95% of our waking lives is purely using system 1. And then it's got system 2, which is slow and logical and actually very, very lazy. So we only use it about 5% of the time because it's really, really slow, and it wants to, think through all the kind of logic of different things. And unfortunately, our world is too busy and fast for our brain to do much of that slow thinking. So we have these two systems. And system 1, and this is kind of my way of explaining it rather than Kahneman's, is like a massive filing cabinet. So it's like a filing cabinet that has been there since the day that we were born, and it's been collecting all of our experiences throughout our life and filing them away. When we come to a decision, or we're faced with a situation that maybe a new person or a new situation has come to us, and we don't know what to do or how to deal with it or anything about the situation, our system 2, our slow rational brain, kicks in. It kicks in to help us make a decision. However, it doesn't know anything, it doesn't have any information. So it has to work with system 1, has to say, what do we know? What have we got in our filing cabinet that we know that can help us to make a decision, take an action in this situation? And what system 1 does is it pulls out what we know, and it gives it to system 2 and says, there you go, here's a plausible next step or explanation, and we behave or act on that information. Now, the difficulty is that filing cabinet has been filed by someone in a rush. So it's been filed by someone who is being bombarded with information, and they estimate that every 1 second our brain takes in 11 million bits of information. So it's a lot, and it's been filing them away, but still we've got to do 11 million a second. So it's associating them, it's taking shortcuts, it's going, oh, we met someone called Giles 10 years ago, now we've met someone else called Giles, we'll just file them in the same place because that's easier, even though those people have got nothing to do with each other. So it starts to make assumptions, and this is the difficulty. It's filing so much information that these assumptions, these errors in the filing system, these stereotypes, they're what we call unconscious biases. We didn't mean to put them there. It wasn't because we're malicious or we don't like a certain type of person. It was just our brain making mistakes and trying to work too quickly. But what we need to think about is, well, how does this affect us then? How does this affect the way that we behave with each other? Well, let's watch this quick video that will sum some of this up before we think about the impact.
Have you ever wondered how you make decisions? Most of us would like to think that we weigh alternatives and arrive at well thought out conclusions. But every day we make countless decisions without even realizing it. Every moment we're inundated with around 11 million bits of information, and yet research suggests that our conscious brains can only handle something like 40 bits of information a second. This means our minds are constantly processing information, and for the most part without our conscious awareness. Our brains evolved this way to ensure survival. This automatic thinking acts as a danger detector, determining if something or someone is safe. Where people are concerned, these decisions are hardwired into us. We respond positively to people we perceive to be like us and react against people perceived to be too different. Which was okay in life or death situations, but not so great in the workplace. Sometimes these mental shortcuts can lead us astray, especially when they cause us to misjudge people. When you see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are automatically making judgments about them. The subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, and who we're putting into leadership positions. It's important to recognize that everyone has these biases. Think of it as a human brain software glitch. Of course, it seems unfair to choose a CEO because of height, hire someone because of their sex, or give lower performance scores to people who are overweight, and yet all of these things continuously happen without us even realizing we're doing it. The good news is, despite the complex nature of the problem, mitigating the impact of unconscious bias is a relatively simple matter of raising awareness and developing a more mindful approach at key decision-making times. Just as you'd avoid a dangerous blind spot when driving, we want you to become aware of your own unconscious blind spots. In doing so, you'll recognize the effects they can have on others, and you can take steps to combat unconscious bias in your workplace.
Okay, so
Have you
let's think about some different types of unconscious bias then. Well, you've heard of stereotypes, which is one type of unconscious bias, when we group people together and we say that everyone who is in that group acts a certain way or does a certain thing. We also have affinity biases, which is where people who have shared similarities with us, we're more likely to feel positive about them. So I'm a cat lover, hence why there's a cat on this one. If I meet someone else who's also a cat lover, then I'm much more likely to think them as a whole person is really, really nice, even though I'm sure there are horrible cat lovers out there. So that's affinity bias. We have something called in-groups and out-groups. So we are much more likely to spend time and quality time, ask questions, and also believe and trust people who are like us. They're in our in-group. And those people who are different from us, in whatever way they may be different, we are all the opposite. So we're less likely to trust them, we're less likely to spend time with them, we're less likely to invest by asking questions, getting to know them, because we feel less comfortable doing so. And this then obviously perpetuates any unconscious biases about that type of person as well, because we're not giving ourselves time to really get to know them. This leads to something called halo or horns effect. So then when a person who is like us and in our in-group does something, we're much more likely to see them as a good person. They get this halo above them. Yeah, they'll always be there. They're really trustworthy, etc. If someone outside of the group makes a mistake, does something wrong, then we're much more likely to sort of brand them as being bad. They're a bad person. So it's the horns effect. And then we can't see all the other great things that they do because we're too preoccupied with that bad thing that they did. And there's another one called conformity bias. And this is really important in groups, which you are obviously part of, groups, cycling groups. So conformity bias, and this picture's from a study, is where we act like those around us, even when we know it's wrong. So in this study, the people, groups of 10 people who didn't know each other were given the same picture, and then they went along the row of people and they said, exhibit 1 is equal in length to which line in exhibit 2? So you had to say whether it was equal in length to A, B or C. Now it's supposed to be obvious, that's the point of the experiment. It's supposed to be obvious that it's equal to line A. But what they did is that some of the people in the experiment were actually actors. So they primed them to say the wrong answer on purpose, and then those who were real participants who didn't know about the actors, they measured how likely they were to conform to the wrong answer when other people were saying it, and they found staggering results. And this study has been repeated time and time again. I think it was first done in the 60s and has been repeated for sort of the next kind of 20 years and then developed upon. And it pretty much always shows very similar results, that we are likely to say things we don't mean because everyone else seems to be saying them. So they reckon about 80% of the time people conform to the group, so it's very high. If the group is made up of people who seem to be in charge in some way or senior, so they've done it with, say, groups of doctors in white coats with stethoscopes who we see as having power, it goes up to way above 80%, way into the 90% chance that we will conform to them. So this is really important in regards to things like safety, in regards to the group itself. So if people who are sort of running or in charge of those groups, so seen to have some sense of power, do things a certain way, even if other people in the group know that maybe that's not the safest way or the best way to do it, they are much more likely to conform. And once a few people conform, then everyone conforms to that way of doing it. So it's something to be really aware of, because it does impact how a group behaves together, and particularly the safety of that group. So when are we more likely to be affected by bias? Well, actually, we're more likely to be affected at certain times of the day. So particularly when we're tired and stressed and we need something to eat, maybe we don't have all the information, so we're sort of pressured to make a decision quickly. So if you think maybe at the end of a long ride, everyone's tired, you're all ready for some food or some drink, or you're all sort of in a rush to go and pick up your kids from what they were doing, or whatever it might be, that's when our brain only relies on system 1, and it's much more likely to make judgments about people, make rash decisions. So it's one of the things we can think about in regards to how do we manage bias. We can think about and be aware that at certain times we're more likely to be affected. So sometimes it can be a case of not just saying to ourselves, well, don't jump to conclusions about that, actually wait a moment, maybe make the decision next time, telling yourself some of those things so it doesn't affect you as much in that moment. Other ways that we can minimise the impact of unconscious bias, well, we can acknowledge and notice when and how our bias is impacting us. So I know, for example, that I live in Yorkshire, but I did live in London for a couple of years. And when I was living in London, if I heard a Yorkshire accent, then I know that I was much more likely to feel a warm sense towards that person. I was more likely to spend time with them, get to know them, invest in that person because of an affinity that I had, a Yorkshire accent with that person. So I can acknowledge that, and I can be aware that that's what my natural behaviour is. So if I'm in a group situation and there are people there that have those similar accents to me, and there are other people, then I can make a conscious choice not to spend too much time with that individual, and to make sure I'm actually getting to know everyone as well. So first thing to do is acknowledge, where are my natural affinities? Who am I drawn to? Who am I not? Who do I need to purposefully get to know more of? And how can I do that? You can redesign some of these processes in your head, and you do that by 3 ways. Exposure to new information. So you redesign some of the wiring when you are exposed to things that contradict it. So if you've always assumed that people called Chardonnay are under the age of 25, and then you meet a 60-year-old Chardonnay, a new wiring is made because you've been exposed to new information. So get out there, meet new people, purposefully get involved in different groups, or encouraged people into your group who are different. Also, read different information, watch different things on TV. If you always watch BBC News, watch ITV or Channel 4 for a week, see how you feel about it. Because everyone tells what is factual information differently because of their particular slant. So this exposure causes potential contradictions in our brain, and then we have to resort our wiring out. The last thing that we can do is collaborate. So in our groups, we can think, okay, I might be officially the leader, but how do we collaborate to mean that if we've got people from different genders, different ethnicities, different backgrounds, that they can take a role on, or we can all work together to make this a real success. So just in summary then, there's lots of things that we can do to minimise unconscious bias, and I want to just give you some kind of further reading places to go for those of you that are interested. There's Daniel Kahneman's book, as I said. There's also some really great books like Microaggressions, which is also about unconscious bias, the inclusion imperative, the gender games. So these are all things that you can read if you wish to, but also some links to things online. So I'd really recommend Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes. It's a very old experiment, but still very relevant, and you can watch it on YouTube. And it's about children and how bias is brought about in really young children. And if you want to read more about why inclusion and diversity matters, then have a look at some reports like the McKinsey Why Diversity Matters report as well. So that's the end of my time, because I know you've all got to get off to the next session. So unfortunately, I've not left any time for questions. I'm really sorry about that. But I didn't see any questions come in, as it were. But if you did have any questions, then you can always send them through to Julie and the organisers, and I'll be more than happy to get back to people and answer them as well. So thank you very much for having me, and I'll hand back over.